We made it happen. Jimmy was an incredible success. I don't know where he is. I gotta find him. Gosh, I don't. Oh.
Oh yeah, George. Oh, George.
Right
George.
here. Yeah.
We did it, brother.
Yes, we
hey,
did.
Thanks to Dan. You know what? And in the ring with Dan and Benny. Hey, brother, man, he's about the most cat. I just love him to death. I love you. Thanks for having me. Hey, you're the best. I'm telling you, brother. In the ring with
Dan and Benny.
Yeah.
We love you. Thank you so much.
Dan.
Mwah.
Oh yeah.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Dan and Benny in the Ring. I'm Dan Sebastiano, joined as always by the playa himself, Benny Scala. Benny, how you doing, buddy?
Dan, I want to give out a heartfelt congratulations to Chuck Norris and the rest of the Texas Rangers on winning the 2023 World Series.
Couldn't have done it without him.
He was the 25th man, right, Walker?
Apparently. Well, I'm glad you watched because as a diehard baseball fan myself, I was kind of heartbroken when they said that was the lowest watched World Series in over a decade.
Very, very sad.
But I mean, in all fairness, when you had your Braves and Orioles and all these teams that were bringing in big numbers, that was Rangers Diamondbacks was probably the worst combination baseball could have hoped for as far as national ratings.
Or maybe except for the Rockies.
It would have
and
been
the Rays
better
or
if the
something
Phillies would have been in there.
Yeah, I agree. The Phillies would have brought some numbers, and
They're
hey,
obnoxious fans.
Benny, this is our last chance for a while to get distracted with baseball news. So get it out of our system now. But we're doing something a little different today, Benny. You and I, we've been talking about wanting to do something like this for a while now. We've got a panel assembled today. So first, why don't you introduce our guests? We'll give them a chance to talk about themselves here in a second. But why don't you tell everybody what we're doing today? It's a little different.
We're doing a show of a different color there. So we got two very good friends as well as devoted wrestling fans telling us what they like and what they don't like about professional wrestling. We're going to call this episode, I guess, Then and Now, or whatever we want to call it. But now for our guests. And ladies always first, so I'm delighted to introduce my very dear friend, heel manager extraordinaire and recent newlywed, Jade Ambrosia. And our other guest is another very dear friend, the Prince of the Peaceable Kingdom, Mr. Tony Rocca. Jade and Tony, welcome to Dan and Benny in the Ring.
Hello.
Thank you guys for the wonderful introduction, and thank you, Jade. It's nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you as well. Thank you.
Now, Jade, we'll start with you. Benny always won for quick nicknames and his great introductions. Heel manager extraordinaire. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Well, I've been a wrestling fan my whole life. It's one of the first memories I've ever had. And not to get too sappy or anything, but I went through a near-death experience 2 years ago. And after that, I was like, life's short. It's time to finally do what I've always wanted to do. So I started training with Jimmy Valiant. And I am a very bad perfectionist. And I was like, I'm not ready to get into the ring quite yet. So now I'm just a heel manager.
Not just a heel manager.
Heel manager extraordinaire.
Absolutely.
I can respect that. And Tony, anyone who knows you on social media sees a lot of your posts involving animals and your involvement with the zoo. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Again, I compliment Jade as far as my early memories of going to any first events or any big events. It's always been wrestling. It's in my blood. I'm part of the Philadelphia Zoo. I've been a conservation educator there. I've been an animal caretaker there, pursuing my zoo and aquarium science certification. And as far as anything animals go, I'm the go-to guy. It's the best job in the world, and that aspect is my background. Currently, I'm also an Army veteran. I served with the 29th Infantry Division, 116th Brigade Combat Team during the Iraq period, and still maintain my relationships with several of my battle buddies that I served with. And they say, when you're a veteran, they say it was the best time of your life, and it was.
As a former Navy man myself, I can understand that sentiment. It's been about 10 years I've been out, so I get it. But like Benny said,
well, thank you for your service, Dan. Thank you for your service.
You too, sir. Like Benny said at the top of the hour, we wanted to kind of do a fan fest. Obviously, there's a little bit of an age gap, and we wanted that. We wanted more of the new and more of the, and I mean this with all respect, Tony, more of the old. As a matter of fact, Tony, Benny suggested reaching out to you when we started the Dan and Benny Facebook page. You were one of our very first signups, so you've kind of been with Dan and Benny since day one. So that means a lot to us, and I want to thank you for that.
You're very welcome, and it's my pleasure.
But as we have said, though, ladies first. So we'll start. Jade, first question to you. You hinted on it. You've been a fan your whole life. Every time we do interviews, we always start with the same question. We want to ask people about when they got involved in wrestling as a fan, like when the wrestling bug first bit them. You said you've been a fan your whole life. Do you remember the moment, be it whatever you saw on television or where you went, where you're like, I'm hooked, I'm in?
So when I was a kid, I always remembered like sitting on my grandpa's lap while he watched Nitro. We didn't watch WWE, and then ECW that really bit me. Was ECW definitely? I've always kind of gravitated more towards the hardcore, rough and tough stuff. But I can't really pin down exactly what the first wrestling thing I ever saw was, but I remember every Monday just sitting down watching Nitro and being like, this is what's good in life.
Now, when you ask about Nitro, did you happen to because it's funny, Benny, how many guests, it's the same story. It was my grandpa, my grandma, we used to watch wrestling, like how many people's grandparents got them into wrestling.
Oh, yeah.
Did you, given the area and what would have been on TV at the time, did you watch WCW before Nitro? Like, did any of the Saturday morning Superstars or any of those shows, or did you not get into it until the 90s or the mid 90s with Nitro?
Well, I'm 27.
Okay.
So
we're what, 96 maybe?
Yeah, I remember being like 2, sitting on my grandpa's lap and watching, and I remember he would get tapes from his friends of like the ECW latest shows and stuff, and I remember being very young but seeing the Sabu Terry Funk Born to Be Wired match and being like, this is
oh wow,
the best I've ever seen in my life.
That's another name that pops up a lot. We've had a lot of guests say that Terry Funk was one of their first favorite wrestlers. I guess when you went around the world as many times as he did. Tony, flip side, same question to you. Obviously you probably were, because Nitro debuted in the fall of '95. I imagine you were a fan slightly before that. Do you remember what it was when you what it was that got you hooked when the wrestling bug first bit you?
Oh God, I actually, Dan and Benny and Jade, I actually have, when my dad passed away, he always used to go, like I said, I started going as a kid when the WWF was doing their shows at the Philadelphia Arena. And I don't know if it's like faded memories or favorite recall. I mean, I think they even took me there as a baby, and I never understood what it was until, I became a little, like a toddler, a little older. I have home movies. I need to transfer those things. but my earliest memory, Bruno was a big thing for my family. My family were Italian immigrants, and Bruno was a big thing as far as, common knowledge to the Italian community. Uh, but Bruno also transcended ethnicity. African Americans loved him. Puerto Ricans loved him. Everyone loved Bruno because that was the kind of person he was, the kind of character he was, the kind of dignity he had, the way he carried himself, his values and his character. But my earliest memory, Philadelphia Arena, I think I might have been 7 years old, I want to say. It was a match with Bruno and George the Animal Steel. And George the Animal Steel, the living crap out of him. And there's not much more I can say about that. I mean, of course, Bruno was victorious, but that's my earliest memory of that. With Nitro and the WCW, that's when I finally got back into it. When I lost it was when Vince McMahon Jr. went.
Tony, we
pretty much made.
Here he is.
Sorry, you cut out for a second there. Can you had just said Vince McMahon? You mind repeating that?
I'm sorry. I'm in a cave in my room here. When Vince McMahon Jr. broke kayfabe was when I really stopped watching. When he turned, he turned the wrestlers into comic book characters, and and all that, and the MTV stuff and everything else. That's when I pretty much stopped watching. I got back into it in the 90s with WCW, and when everybody jumped ship, Hogan and Roddy Piper and all them went, and it became, the way it was before. It became
Back in that cave.
yeah. But my very first memory, I think I was 6 or 7 years old, Philadelphia Arena, because they didn't move to the Philadelphia Spectrum, I think, until the mid 70s. And the first match I ever remember vividly was Bruno versus George the Animal Steel.
So,
Nice.
follow-up question. Dan. I'm sorry, Dan.
Yeah, you're good.
Tell us about your journey. So, like Jade, always ladies first. Describe your fandom throughout your life. So you started watching when you were a couple of years old. When did you go to your first show? Did you maintain a consistent interest in wrestling throughout your whole life? And then in your case, maybe tell us about a little bit more as far as why you wanted to get into wrestling, although you kind of touched on it already. And then we'll have Tony do the same thing.
Yeah, so I didn't go to my first event until I was like 18 because I just never had the money really growing up. I was kind of the only one that was kind of into it after my grandpa passed. So I didn't really have any way to go see it live, but I always watched. Because in my day, I remember Monday was Raw, Tuesday was ECW. We didn't have anything on Wednesday. Thursday was Superstars. Friday was SmackDown. Saturday was Ring of Honor. And Sunday, it was, for a while, either Velocity or Heat. So I always had something to watch. And I was a pretty consistent fan for most of my life up until about 2014 is when I kind of like pushed away from WWE and started watching more New Japan and Indies and stuff like that, and fell in love with the whole back catalog of CZW and things like that. And I didn't really start watching WWE again probably until 2017. And then now I watch pretty much as I can. Except I don't watch WWE anymore, but I watch a lot of New Japan, TDT, AEW, GCW, ICW, stuff like that.
And Jade, I forgot to ask one question. Who have been your favorites? I kind of know who your favorite is now, but who have been your favorites?
My all-time favorite, the one who made me fall in love with wrestling, was Edge. Edge
Okay.
stood out to me as soon as I saw him in the Brood. And then watching him evolve into the Rated R Superstar, and now seeing him in
Adam Copeland.
AEW as Adam Copeland, yes. And but Edge and China. China was, if I talk about China too long, I'll cry. So I won't do that. But I love China. Now it's Jon Moxley.
I was waiting for you to say that. You were going to disappoint me there for a second.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have his name tattooed on me, so I kind of have to talk about him.
Oh,
do you really?
We do, yeah.
Okay. Can we ask where?
It's my kneecap.
Okay.
But as soon as he debuted in the Shield, I was like, I need to figure out everything I can about him. So I started watching HWA, CZW, everything he had done before, and now I'm pretty obsessed, I guess.
That's right. He trained at Heartland Wrestling Academy, right?
Yes, he did.
Okay, under Les Thatcher, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
who was I think, two-time guest on our show. Really, really good guy. That's interesting.
Yeah, everything about like the way that he wrestles, especially now, is kind of what I want to do. Is the
Okay.
hardcore brawler, and it's very reminiscent to me of Harley Race, and that's
an interesting comparison.
Yeah, just hard hitting. It's great.
I like it.
Anthony, how about you?
Oh, I was distracted. What was his question again? I'm sorry.
What's the square root of 170? No. Just over the course of the years, when did you go to your first show? How often did you go? I'd ask you who your favorite is, but I already know that. That's an easy one. But did you have anybody else besides Bruno?
After Bruno, I kind of got into the heels more. The Larry Zbyszkos, the Roddy Pipers, that sort of thing. The Bret Hart before he became a face. We started going to the matches from as early as I can remember. Like I said, at the Philadelphia Arena, then later, with the transfer at the Philadelphia Spectrum, and every month on that Saturday, my parents, and it's emotional for me to think about it, but it's the greatest memories of my parents were those Saturdays every month, either going to the arena or going to the Spectrum to see Bruno. It's just tremendous memories. Some of the matches that really stick out in my mind. The Epic 3, the Epic 3 with Superstar Billy Graham in '78 after Bruno dropped the belt to him, where the Spectrum set a record attendance. It was even Vince McMahon took out a whole full page ad in the Philadelphia Inquirer thanking the Philadelphia wrestling fans.
Wow.
Where you had the two matches and then you had the final steel cage match. I mean, they were turning people away. There were like 5,000-6,000 people that came down that, and back then too, what's different today, as far as getting tickets, in the 70s, when I was little and we went to the matches, after the show was over and you were leaving the building, the box office was open, so you could purchase tickets for the the next month's event, and they would always sit there after the show was over and they'd do like a lineup card. Next month it's this versus this for he versus that, this, and that's how it was in the 70s. It's being a kid in the 70s and growing up watching wrestling the way it was then. I wouldn't. It was the best. I wouldn't take that back for anything. Wonderful time.
No argument here.
Absolutely. Well, we talked about the past. Let's talk about the current. Jade, I'll start with you. You mentioned not really watching WWE. You're obviously clearly AEW fan. So we'll start with you. One, if you could expand a little bit more on what you watch from the current product, and what are your thoughts on it?
I watch a lot of deathmatch stuff. That's primarily my expertise. I've been front row at Tournament of Survival. I'm going to be front row for the Nick Gage Invitational. I'm really big into GCW. I go up to the Atlantic City weekends a lot. And there's nothing quite like being in a room full of deathmatch fans with the way that deathmatch performers are. I also love AEW because it has the sense of like what I fell in love with, which was kind of the Attitude Era, of Ruthless Aggression era. It reminds me of a lot of that. And it really truly makes me feel like a kid again. And I get very giddy, and it's no matter what is happening in the world or anything like that, I can watch wrestling and it makes me incredibly happy.
Well, let me ask you a quick expansion on your side. As you got into wrestling later than the rest of us, did you go back and watch any of the old, like YouTube or the old tapes or whatever, and go watch the territory matches and stuff from the 70s and 80s and even before? Do you watch any of the old wrestling?
Yes, I do. If I'm watching anything, there's wrestling on my television. Probably.
Okay. Well,
I watch a lot of stuff.
Okay, then I wanted to ask your thoughts, because Benny and I were talking before the show. What do you think? And I want to get this from the younger fan. When you watch the current product, be it you mentioned people by name like Nick Gage and John Moxley, you go back and watch older wrestling. What do you think about watching the current product and seeing moves like the super kick and the DDT, and even more modern, more recently, like Canadian Destroyer, and moves that used to be when I was a kid would, Jake hit the DDT, that was it, match over. Now you watch a match today, John Moxley or whoever, and you'll see a dozen DDTs, a dozen super kicks, people selling Canadian Destroyers. What do you think about the fact that moves that when we were kids, or I should say, when I was a kid, and then obviously before that, Benny and Tony, being not so much like about, what do you think about the evolution of the product?
I think that the evolution of the product is it's more so not the product itself, but I think it's the performers a lot. I think that a lot of wrestlers now have taken so much inspiration, but from so many different styles, and kind of combined them. Because then, of course, like you do have strong style wrestling where they're not doing the DDTs all the time. They're not doing the super kicks. They're not doing the showy stuff. That it's the fundamental basis of wrestling. But then you have people like MJF who can literally do anything. He just chooses not to, but he'll pull it out because to his core, he's an old school wrestling fan. So he sticks to the bases, he sticks to his technicality, but then he'll pull out a tope suicida just to show you that he can. And I think there is a love of the pure craft of wrestling, but it has evolved past that, whereas you have a lot of athletic wrestlers now, but back then it was who looks the biggest, not necessarily who is the most athletic, but who looks it. But now we have people who can show that they're athletic and they don't necessarily have to look it.
Okay, I can respect that. Tony, then question to you. Do you follow the current product at all? Do you still watch modern wrestling?
Uh, Really, I stopped watching a long time ago. I recently got an interest in Ring of Honor. Actually, when I was serving in the Army, I lived in Virginia, Christ, for 15 years. And that was the only product as far as wrestling came on was ROH. And it was always on a Saturday night at 1 a.m. But if you know anything about the military, your sleep is screwed up anyway. As far as the current product, I like the I'll do the YouTube videos and stuff like that. But my thing is, and I'm going to show my age now, and I'm going to show my bias now, is back in our day of the 70s. Okay, I mean, the wrestlers back then, could do the same things that the wrestlers do now as far as being athletes. It wasn't a matter of not being able to do it. It was a different time, and it was, they didn't have to do it. What's lacking today in the modern product is the emotion that the emotion that wrestling had back in the old school in the 70s. You can't get that anymore. You can't get that today. I mean, wrestling today, I mean, the audience will sit there and then you'll see it's like acrobats now. It's not really wrestling. When you had a finishing move back in the 70s, you knew that was it. That guy was done. Today you'll see, people will be sitting there in the audience, and then, somebody will take a big bump and fall from the top of the steel cage through 15 tables, and everybody will cheer, and then they'll just sit down and then they'll wait for the next big bump. There's no emotion. Back then, like I said, you can't get the emotion involvement of the fans from the 70s that
Talking about the ring psychology, which good, bad, or indifferent is definitely something that's changed.
Right. Agree.
Exactly. I've seen the superstar Billy Graham shoot interviews, read his book, read Larry's memoir. When Bruno dropped the belt to Superstar, when Larry did his heel turn to Bruno, people wanted to kill them. They actually had death threat. The police in New York would actually call Larry Zbyszko's hotel room and say, "Don't go to this restroom. You've got don't go to this restaurant. You've got death threats." He was stabbed. Going to a match to fight Bruno. He was in a taxi cab. A mob came over and actually overturned the taxi cab. Police had to come, drag him out of the car. And a lot of the times after his heel turn on Bruno, he had to be the undercard, the first or second match, so he could get out of there without getting hurt. Superstar Billy Graham, the same thing. When Bruno dropped the belt to him, death threats. He was also, he also had to fight himself out of arenas from fans, going at, and that's what's missing. That's the difference. That's what made, in my opinion, our era the best era is the emotion, the emotional involvement into. I mean, and even whatever you want to say about wrestling, and character development and I mean when you looked at Bruno, okay, he was a bull. He was a friggin' silverback gorilla. You could look at Bruno and you could, in your mind, you could say Bruno could walk through a wall because he looked like
Yeah, he had the physique. I know Benny and I had the pleasure of interviewing or being on a panel, I should say, with Larry Zbyszko a couple years back, and he mentioned his physique was similar to Bruno's because of how they trained.
They trained together, right?
Yeah, they did they did the same workout and everything, and that was the whole thing when they did the Shea Stadium and they did the heel turn. The McMahons weren't sold on it, and because with Bruno, his opponent had to be 6'5" and 350 pounds, and then they're looking at Zbyszko. They're both the same height, almost the same weight. And like I said, you looked at a Chief J Strongbow back then. He'd run around and do his Indian death dance and karate chop, and you'd think, hey, man, he could kill you.
I can understand that. Benny, next question to you. What are you thinking?
Yes, sir. So, and again, ladies first, and we know who I guess your favorites are now. So, Jade, do you think somebody like a John Moxley, if he got put in a wrestling time machine and he got transported back to, let's say, Mid-South in 1981, do you think he would translate into that era?
Absolutely. I think, especially with the way that he is technically, I do think that he would thrive because of how hard hitting, and he does have a lot of old school feel to him. He doesn't really do a lot of flashy things. He doesn't do high flying moves. He never really leaves the mat. And I do think that he could thrive, especially in Mid-South. I definitely think so.
I would think he'd be a guy that would, he'd be like the prototypical territory guy. He'd wrestle in every territory, maybe for 6 to 9 months. He'd win a belt everywhere he went. And he might not be the champion, but he'd be like, like maybe the U.S. champion or a tag. He'd be a champion of some sort. He'd be up, up to the, top of the main event. So I agree with that. He's definitely hardcore wrestling. And I don't even mean the way he wrestles. I just mean he's a wrestler. And yes, he would, if he was alive if he was born in 1958 and he was 24 in 1982, I think, I think his passion for wrestling, if it was the same as it was now, he definitely would have been a star in the territories. Tony, how about Bruno? Do you think Bruno, if Bruno got put in a time machine from 1977 to 2023, do you think Bruno would be the same, have the same impact as he did back then?
Bruno at that age?
Yeah, Bruno in his prime.
Oh, absolutely, he would. Like I said, when McMahon broke kayfabe and destroyed for pro wrestling essentially, and then brought in all the juiced, gassed up steroid guys, which, if I'm not mistaken, they couldn't move. So the Lex Lugers and the Ultimate Warriors, they invented the clothesline as the finishing move because they couldn't do anything else. Bruno, if Bruno was wrestling in today's product, Bruno would destroy what's out there. The acrobats could flip around and jump around and everything. Bruno put him in a backbreaker and win.
But don't you think? I think to a certain extent, and it wouldn't be Bruno's fault, but it was really McMahon. The fact that McMahon, destroyed kayfabe. Bruno. I'm sure you feel the same way I did. I thought Bruno was Superman. I thought Bruno was indestructible. And I thought, yes, when I went to a match and I saw him face Tanaka, my heart was in my throat thinking, like, dear God, please don't let Bruno lose. And he always found a way to win. But
yeah,
I just
Tanaka
wonder
would throw the salt in his face,
yeah.
That gimmick. Yeah.
I wonder if it was more salt. What if he had a certain brand that he preferred?
Was.
But I just wonder, like, would Bruno's invincibility have been, hindered by the fact that people know what's going on now. Where when we thought it was
Yeah, they got
legit,
wise to it. Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
might. Do you think that might have hurt Bruno? I do actually. I mean, I think Bruno still would have been a huge, just because of who he was, would have been a huge favorite. But I
Yeah.
don't think he would have been quite the same.
Yeah. You know what? Now that you put it in that frame of reference, as far as, like I said, as far as the emotional investment of our day compared to now, I think that I kind of agree with you now, to an extent, as far as Bruno. Yeah, because everything now is flashbang. It's acrobats. It's like I said, I wish the closest it got to our era, what we grew up, was the ECW and the WCW, when they had that split, and unfortunately the infighting and all the other crap destroyed that. But that was the closest to getting back to the wrestling that we grew up with, that we knew.
Right.
The golden era of the 60s and 70s.
Well, I mean, Jade, I know you talked about, obviously you mentioned Edge and the Brood, which still one of my favorite entrance themes ever, just entrance in general. But you had these moments. I was kind of hoping, other than maybe Edge coming out or some of the first, your impactful moment. Is there that one impactful moment where you were just like, if you had to pick just one, a match, a promo, something you saw on the screen, even if it's only for a few minutes, that one moment that impacted you forever, and that's what cemented your legacy as a wrestling fan?
Oh yeah, I think everybody. I say all the time that like generations have the moment. Um, One of my uncles saw the slam, and that's cool. For me, my moment was Edge spearing Jeff Hardy when Jeff Hardy was hanging from the title at
Oh yeah.
Mania XM. That's what did it for me. That was I whenever I'm like talking to someone and trying to convert them to a wrestling fan, I'm like, let me show you something, and that's always it. And I and I guess maybe I'm biased because it is Edge, but that's the moment that hooked me for life.
And the TLC match was legendary, even for even fans who don't like the weapons or the what is it? Maybe not weapons is the right word. The stuff like that. That match was absolutely incredible. But let me ask you a quick expansion on that. You watched the current product. Adam Copeland debuted in AEW a couple weeks ago. What do you think about somebody who could, what was that, 20 years ago, more, have the TLC match, go through the career he had, and here we are, 2023, better part of 30 years after Damon Stryker first showed up as a jobber on WCW, and he's still going, and he's still one of the better performers in the business today. What do you think about that?
I truly think that it shows, using his own word, but it shows grit. It shows passion, and especially for Edge, he was gone for 9 years, and he was told he could never do this again.
Right.
And he ended his career probably in a way that anybody could ever want to. 31 championships. His entire illustrious career was with one company, pretty much. And to have all of that and then say, I still want to come back and I still want to do this on my terms. It's not like he has anything to show us. It's just the love of the craft. And just me and my husband get into an argument about this all the time, but I truly believe Edge belongs in the Mount Rushmore conversation because of that. 30 years still can move very well. And he is someone that I would love to sit down and pick their brain about wrestling, because he's one of the people that gets it. Tony mentioned, the psychology and everything, the emotion, and that is something that Edge has always done. Whether he conveys it with just his face in a promo, or the words that he uses, or just how he can counter a certain move, the way that Edge understands psychology is also another reason why I was really excited for him to go to AEW, is because there are a lot of younger talents there that I think could really benefit from hearing not only from Christian, that's already there, but Edge as well, to like one of the best tag teams of the modern era, and to learn from them and to be able to pick their mind is going to, I think, really help elevate the next generation that we are preparing.
Tony, obviously your generation and your era, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is your because you talked about it earlier, is your defining moment the Zbyszko turning on Bruno, or do you have a different defining moment for your fandom back then?
You hit the nail on the head. That heel turn with Zbyszko and Bruno. Now that I know, back then, 1980, I was almost a freshman in high school, but I was still, the emotion and all the other stuff and the psychology, and I was still, I was wise to it, by then, as far as how wrestling worked, and as far as how, the things did things. And I've spoken to Benny before, and we've shared it.
Oh yeah.
A lot of times. When Zbyszko hit Bruno those 3 times on the chair, with the chair, and he bladed, I cried. I was like, oh my God. And I can't even begin to tell you the reaction and the response of my parents. That was the defining moment, when the Zbyszko heel turn on Bruno was one of the most defining moments. One of the most defining matches when I was a kid. I think I was 10 years old. I was either 9 or 10 years old. Was when they moved to the Philadelphia Spectrum. It was a cage match with Bruno and Ivan Koloff. And then, from memories from being a kid, I was like, oh my God, the Russian Bear beat him, took his belt. You're on your edge of your seat the entire time. And those are the two, the Ivan Koloff Bruno cage match. 10 years old. How old was it? 1976. The Bruno, 10 years old, 19. The Bruno Ivan Koloff cage match, Philadelphia Spectrum, and the watching on TV, the Zbyszko heel turn on Bruno were my 2 defining moments of my era, the old school era, as far as my being captivated and wanting to go on as far as watching.
I like it, Benny. As we wrap up here, Jade, I real quick, amazing choice in beverage, by the way. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, I had to make sure that you can't see the.
Hey, this is off topic. I know you guys are closing, but you want to hear a Army Infantry life hack as far as beverages and hangovers?
Go for it.
keeping us in suspense.
Yeah, right.
Iraq. It only works with vodka, and it's an acquired taste. So uh, when you make your vodka drinks, your chaser use Gatorade or use Powerade. It's an acquired taste, and the reasoning and the logic behind that, and it works, is that you're not only feeling the effects of the alcohol, but you're also hydrating at the same time. And in the morning, there's no
That's
hangover.
that's fair. Spent enough hurt mornings over my years overseas, so I get it. Benny, as we
I
go ahead, Tony.
guarantee it. I guarantee it. It works. I've experienced it, and yeah, it works.
Well, for those that are just going to listen and not be our on the YouTube side, Jade had we're not going to mention a brand name, but she had one of the pouch drinks that I can never seem to get the straw in right. So very, very, I haven't seen one of those in a long time. Benny, as we wrap up, final question to you. What are you thinking?
Well, I'm going to ask both of them. I think this is really crucial to understanding then versus now. And Jade and I have talked quite a bit about wrestling. And, the bottom line is, Tony and I, back in the day, when we watched wrestling, we were watching people fighting. And now when Jade watches AEW, it's more that it's obviously a performance. I mean, and that's to me, the biggest difference is that wrestling has evolved from the fan perception of a fight versus a performance. So Jay, does that, and understanding that you grew up with this, does the fact that you pretty much know it's not a true fight, does that take away in any way your enjoyment watching it?
No, not at all. I actually remember the exact moment I found out it was not real. I was probably like 8 years old. Kane had Shawn Michaels a steel chair around his neck, and he stomped on it. Shawn's like bleeding everywhere, and I'm like freaking out. And I was adopted at the time, and my guardian was like, "It's not real." And I just remember it was like a kid finding out Santa wasn't real. It was just kind of like,
what? Santa's not real?
Sorry, babe.
Oh, jeez.
But it was kind of like that. It doesn't take the magic away from like Christmas itself. I'm still like, people still celebrate Christmas even though they know Santa's not real. It just the veil is gone. And I think it also, knowing that it's not real, and especially after like me myself stepping into the ring and training, you get another appreciation of, you have to learn how to do this to not hurt yourself or other people. And it's anybody can get into a fight. Anybody can go punch someone in the face and fight somebody. But the fact that the way that they do this and put on a performance and make it safe, and of course it's not ballet, people do get hurt, but I have always had such a deep admiration for the athletic aspect of wrestling itself with the performance. And I have never not enjoyed that, no matter if like kayfabe was dead or not.
Right. Very interesting. How about you, Tony?
I tend to agree with what Jay just said. I mean, the wrestlers are legitimate athletes. Okay. Yes, the outcomes are predetermined. There's angles, there's storylines, but they're still athletes, and they're still needing, and with the performances, you need to know the moves. You need to know, hey, if you get body slammed, land on both your feet so your back doesn't get jacked up. The things like that. They're still athletes, and they're still performances. I don't take anything away from that. And I agree with what she said 100%. As far as the aspect of wrestlers back then and now as performers, you need to know the craft. And if you don't know the craft, you're going to get hurt. And if you don't know the craft and you don't know the moves, you're going to hurt your opponent if you don't complete that move correctly. I mean, to that extent, I see the timeline as far as the product, as far as the performances. But I still say to this day that the era, the Bruno era, that era, you know, and I love Edge. I love, you know, the Big Show. I went through all that, you know, and Roddy Piper and ECW and WCW and I still say to this day, Ken Patera would have been a great heel champion.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
100%.
He should,
without question.
he should have beat Bob Backlund. He should have been, and Superstar was so over, even as a heel, he got so popular, he would have been a great babyface champion as well.
Yeah, they should have turned him and kept his reign
even
going.
as the exactly. And like I said, this has been a great podcast. Jade, I'm so happy to have been on here and honored to speak with you and listen, you know, hear your views and hear your history, Dan and Benny. So happy to be with you guys and inviting me on here. But I will still, as far as then versus now, I will still go with then. That's just my.
I have to add
Just
one
like
quick thing, and you know, I use the word performance, but you know, as the current and only commissioner of Boogie's Wrestling Camp, BWC, you know, I've gone there many a Sunday, watching everybody, you know, practice their you know, their skills, and it is, performance or not, it is a very, very physical thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's not ballet. I mean, yes, maybe it's predetermined, but these guys, I mean, when you hear you can't fake taking a bump, you know, the impact, or, you know, a chop to the chest. I mean, it hurts. And the thing is,
you gotta be in character when you take that bump. If you're a face or you're a heel,
right?
you have to sell it. You know.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And that goes into like,
what I have here in Levittown, Pennsylvania, is the Ring of Honor, the RHO dojo, and several of my friends at the zoo moonlight there. They're trying to become wrestlers.
Wow.
3 have made it to WWE. They're strictly preliminary jobbers, but it's weird. I mean, when I look at all the shoot interviews, nobody was getting into business in the 70s unless somebody knew you or picked you. Zbyszko got into the WWF because of Bruno.
Broke into Bruno's backyard.
Yeah, he broke into Bruno's backyard and then started working, and that's how it was back then. Johnny Rods was Gorilla Monsoon's guy. You know, all those people, you know, they didn't want you in the business back then. You had to prove yourself. All the stories with Roddy Piper and who was the blonde guy he fought a lot in the NWA. He got drunk and wrecked a car every night, and then when he was in the Mid-South for NWA, and he had to they had to go through different airlines.
You're right. Unfortunately, you're going to have to be a hair more specific. NWA wrestler that got drunk and wrecked a car. I can think of about a half dozen stories off the top of my head.
Oh my God! And it's like I'm having a brain fart.
That's
now.
like, you know, an all points bulletin. The suspect is Caucasian between 5'11" and 6'1". You know, that narrows it down about 5 million people.
He had a 1 hour
right?
match with oh my God, what was his name? This is embarrassing. Well, I forget it now. That'll be for another.
You'll remember the minute the podcast is over. Guaranteed.
Of course.
Like it always happens.
Well, Jade, thank you so much. Tony, thank you so much for doing this. As we wrap up, Tony, we'll start with you, and Jade will end with you. I mentioned in your intro, and you obviously said it yourself, your zoo involvement. I know anything you wanna plug or give a shout out to as we wrap up.
The only shout out I want to give out is to support conservation education, support endangered species, support your local zoo where you are, the zookeepers, the animal department, the vet department there do a lot of things as far as saving endangered species. The whole thing with the zoos is captive breeding to rewild and put these endangered species back into their natural environment in the wild. That's my big thing. Again, support your local zoos, visit them, and if any of you guys, Dan, Benny, Jade, ever want to visit America's First Zoo, because that's what we are, the Philadelphia Zoo, I will give you all a VIP tour. We are a start place, and we're a special place.
I love it.
Nice.
Jade, at the top of the hour, we introduced you. You talked about your career, your training, and obviously your activity in wrestling. So does the manager extraordinaire, any social media profiles, any upcoming events, anything like that? Where can our fans find you?
You can find me on pretty much any social media platform as paging Dr. Zeggles, Dr. And the only thing I'll leave you with is support your local indies. Support everybody,
Yes,
everybody that you love started there. Who cares if it's in a high school gym, if it's I just went to one the other day that was in a fire department. Like, everybody starts somewhere. Support local wrestlers.
Absolutely.
Without question. Benny, another great show. Obviously, we've had a lot of fun. Jade, thank you so much for your time. Tony, thank you so much for your time. For those that want to listen, obviously, we start Dan and Benny in the Ring can be found anywhere podcasts are listened to. Thanks again. We'll be on YouTube, our friends at Monty and the Pharaoh. So for Jade Ambrosia, for Tony Rocca, for the playa himself, Benny Scala, I'm Dan Spascio. Have a good night, everyone, and we will see you next time we're in the ring.